Welcome back. Today is the 25th of October. This is CSC443 Network Forensics. And this is an initial result during a walkthrough of the Module 2 solution. I think we may end up walking through the Module 2 solution to demonstrate each of the steps if that's of interest, but we want to call out some highlights as each of you are progressing through the different tasks. Some of the results that we're seeing are truly remarkable. This is one of my first results in my home network, and I'm using Starlink. So we would think that Starlink is more secure. That's the sense that we would get out of something that's state-of-the-art, and it's satellite-based, and it's Elon Musk and all of that, right? And this happens to be a host in my home network. So this is a plain Nmap scan, no attributes. So all I did was scan the subnet. So instead of having Nmap dash lowercase s, uppercase O, and then a specific host, I wasn't scanning for operating systems. It was just a Nmap 192.168.0.1.0/24, right? So all I wanted to do was to take in my own home network, and this baby popped up. So it's an entertainment center. More specifically, it is a DNON entertainment center. It's wireless it's Wi-Fi capable and Ethernet capable, right? And it's designed to switch different 4K video sources and to work Bluetooth connections and to work with iPads and iPhone. I mean, it's basically a super connected entertainment center. And this one highlight is significant in terms of interest. This is before we get to the later tasks, okay? So this is actually the second task before we induce an open port with Python code, yeah? So you don't see the 666 in the list yet. But there's one other concern that we see in this list besides port 23, and I want to call out 23 in particular. So this intelligent appliance has a CPU, right? It's an entertainment, it's an amplifier, right? And I got it connected to my flat screen TV and a 5.1 speaker system, right? So I have a subwoofer and 4. Does anybody else have that kind of setup in their home? Anybody have a sound bar or a Bluetooth speaker?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Telnet used to be the way that we would log in on many systems. In the early days of the internet, Telnet was a simple way to bring up a terminal. So you could Telnet to a host and enter your login credential, your user account, and your password. And basically, you'd have a terminal screen, and then everything you did on that terminal screen was just like sitting on the system, okay? The only problem is that Telnet was unprotected. Telnet is open, quite literally. The characters that are entered and received, so sent and received back and forth between the remote system and the host system, travel across the network unencrypted. So let's pretend you had a sniffer on the network. What's the first thing you could pick up from that sniffer? Hello? If someone was using the telnet to log in for maintenance purposes, what's the first thing that sniffer on the local network could potentially capture?
Password for the Wi-Fi or
Yeah, yeah, password, right? But here's another one, right? So has anyone ever heard of PNP, UPnP?
Yeah, I've heard of it before.
Anybody have game consoles? Virtual reality headsets? Anybody do anything with that?
have a game console.
Okay, you have a game console, yeah? And do you have any accessories for that game console, like wands and stuff? Like
Not
handheld.
really. Well, if the Switch, the remote controls could be wands as well.
Okay, so you could add wands to it, so you could play tennis or golf. I'm talking about an accessory that you would hold in your hand, right? And then you would pretend that it's a golf club or pretend that it's a baseball or something like that, right? Everybody knows what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, so oftentimes on wireless routers, there's an option to enable or disable universal plug and play because it can be a vulnerability, right? But that's not the only interest here. And this is, again, before we induce a port 666 exposure. What else do you see in this list that's a big problem? Uh, I had my coffee 30 minutes ago, so I'm kind of firing on all 8 cylinders. Um, am I scaring anyone? I'm asking you to look at the list and see if there's anything on the list that stands out.
Probably the telnet or the UPnP.
Yeah, the telnet and the
443 as well.
UPnP are two concerns. The other one has to
443 as
do,
well.
say again,
443.
say again.
443. The HTTPS.
Well, that would be, it's curious that that's open because this entertainment center doesn't, actually, now that you mention it, that's a good catch. That wasn't what I was talking about, but let's talk about that some more. This is open because presumably you'd have a web interface that requires encryption, right? So port 443 is usually open when you're entertaining HTTPS connections. Oftentimes, a website connection is first brokered on port 80, but then it's redirected to 443, and that's a common practice. So if somebody just goes to a straight IP address or they just put in a name in the browser link without putting HTTPS in first, most websites are configured to redirect to HTTPS. And the point I'm trying to make is that this is a very old school kind of interface. There's no web interface. It's not web-based. It's all menu driven by characters. So it's like an old DOS. It's like an old command prompt interface with menu choices. And there's no web apps. We don't have apps on this entertainment center. So why this is in here is very curious now that you mention it. It doesn't make any sense that it would be on there because there's no web apps, there's no browser, right? So this doesn't have a built-in browser, but it has connectivity to a huge range of devices. No, the actual point of interest that caught my eye here is something called IRC. Has anyone ever heard of IRC, and do you know what it is? Anyone ever heard of Usenet News? Now we're going way back.
No, I don't think I've heard of it.
So back in the day when the internet first started, the first collaborative, before Twitter, before Facebook, I mean, anyone ever hear of MySpace? Has anyone ever heard of MySpace? Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, you might have been watching Bugs Bunny and gnawing on your fudgesicle then, but in the early days of the internet, they started chat rooms, and one of the popular uses, legitimate uses, were news groups where birds of a feather. So those are called BOF, right? Birds of a feather, BO or BOTF. When you go to professional conferences, they'll have sessions called BOF or BOTF, birds of a feather. That means that like-minded individuals on a given topic would collaborate. They'd grab a room, and then after the conference they would take it offline, right? So this is in the early days of SMTP email, basic email, right, and messaging. They started news groups. Now, hackers had their own flavor of collaboration, which had to do with internet relay chat. So it was an instant messaging. It was it was like an early generation of instant messaging. And the channels in IRC are a particular interest because it's one way that payloads were delivered. So in the early hacks of the internet relay chat was for nerds, for techies, right? And so legitimate researchers used Usenet news groups, and hackers were more focused and used a lot of internet relay chat. Now, there's plenty of cybersecurity experts that would argue that point and say, no, there's, that's a bit of a generalization. I'm like, the hell it is. If you were out there and you were messing around, basically, it's IRC wasn't safe, and it left a channel open. So because it was instant messaging, it left a port open and a channel open on systems for people who participated. It was one of the earliest cases where, hello, you have something that's exposed and it's not good and people are taking advantage of it, right? So that's IRC. Now, here's the thing. I don't see a whole lot of people using IRC anymore. So that begs the question, if you discover something like this in your environment, what the hell do you do about it? Now, we can take a purely academic approach to the remaining objectives and tasks, for the assignments and solutions in the course. But what I'd like to do instead is flip our course into kind of like an open laboratory mode, okay? And each of us have challenges. So on the sidelines, each of you have been sharing about one thing or another that's been a pain in the neck, right? And what I'm doing right now is taking the time to share with you about my concerns. And I want your help to get to the bottom of it. I want to lead by example. And so that's what I'm doing right now. I'm asking for you to consider participating in our course for the rest of the semester, in kind of like our seminar courses, right? On steroids. So I want you to come packed, loaded for bear, right? I want you to come to each session with your screens up and your VMs running. And I want us to do this from now until Thanksgiving. And I'm going to adjust the way we log credit for how and what we do. But I would like to turn this into an open, living, breathing laboratory. And I'd like to do that for most of the rest of the season. Instead of having formal academic modules, I'd like to pose challenges. And then I'd like each of us to take whacks at the challenge. And then I want each of us to share what we've discovered and to suggest remedies, okay? I have a question for some of you. Did anyone have any difficulty generating a SHA-1 hash on your Kali machine? Has anyone tried that yet?
I didn't have any trouble.
It was pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, for the most part.
For the most part, yeah. Does anyone have a Mac? I think I already know the answer to that question. Does anyone in our class have a Mac? Luke?
Had. I'm on
Had?
Windows now. Yep.
Oh, I think Milan still has a Mac. Okay. All right, if we get Milan looped in, maybe Milan could do some things from his terminal on the Mac, right? So what I want to do is include the most common connected devices in our respective home environments. So that's the goal. IRC is open and it's port 6666 and it's an old channel and I don't know why the hell it's in there. But when I look up the MAC address and I look up, I don't know what DNM Holdings is off the top of my head, but when I take the first 6 hexadecimal characters of this MAC address and I look it up, that's how I discovered, okay, I'm dealing with Denon, and I think Denon is a subsidiary of Kawasaki, because when you Google this, there's references to the Kawasaki industrial complex in Japan. Okay, and I could be mistaken, but that's something we could research further. The important thing to understand is that this is a recent purchase. It is a new entertainment system, and it has old as dirt connectivity exposures. And that's something that I would not expect, least of all from Japanese industry. I mean, that's just something I would not expect, right? Now, look at the rest of the screen here. Is there anything else that you see that could be a challenge or an interest? I'm waiting. Okay, let's focus on this client right here, 192.168.1.28. Can everyone pivot? I need everybody to unmute your mics one at a time. I want to make sure you're still with me here.
Still with
Still
you.
here.
Okay. Chamira? Chamira?
Still with you.
Okay. Jadel?
He can't unmute.
Yeah, he's here. He's in the chat.
Okay. All right. Shanoa?
I'm here.
Okay. I think that's everybody. What do you know about these ports right here, 135 and 445? What do they represent? 135 in particular. I want this one to bite you in the nose whenever you see it. Does anybody know what it is? 135?
That's TCP UDP.
It's a TCP connection, yeah. I'll give you a hint. What's lurking behind this tab?
NetBIOS.
NetBIOS. NetBIOS. We like to disable that, right? We don't want to see 135 through 139, and we don't want to see 445. We just don't. Unless, of course, we have a remote desktop connection intentionally. And if we do, we want to use a pinhole firewall rule to shield that from other machines. So if I'm sitting on my Kali machine and I'm doing an Nmap scan of my home network and this shows up and I've disabled my stuff, right? And here's something else that I want to show you. So that's disabled. That shouldn't be showing. If I go into details, okay, I'm sitting on 28, so that's got to be my server. It's good to know, was I on 28? Was I looking at 28? Yeah, I was looking at 28. So this is my server. I've probably enabled remote desktop, but I have a pinhole firewall rule, or I could have a pinhole firewall rule to shield the, let me check something. A lot of times we assume we have a thing set up and we don't. So I have enabled remote desktop. Does everybody see this?
Yeah, we see it.
If you enable other older connectivity options, a lot of times they have hooks into the back end with NetBIOS. So there are hooks in the back end with NetBIOS. And if you enable remote desktop, or if it's part of a domain and it needs to communicate to the domain, there are Kerberos ports that are open. There are domain global catalog and LDAP ports, 389. The remote desktop port is 3389. And I don't see that here. I don't see 3389, but I see 135 and 445. And one thing I want to cue you in on is that there could be other applications, other software that's running a service that depends on an older mechanism. And one of the ways that you can address this is to establish a pinhole firewall rule. Now, if I go into my firewall on this machine, and by the way, if you don't have your virtual machines started yet, you need to start them, because I'm going to ask you to share some screens in a minute. I want each of you to share some things from your screens, whatever you can share. All right. And so if I go into my firewall, and you're probably going to need to go in and out of the firewall quite a bit. So one thing you're going to want to do on your virtual machine is, once you get into this screen, you'll want to right click and pin to the start. So it's on the start menu, right? It's more easily accessible. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up. If I look at the advanced settings, and then I look at my inbound firewall rules, I have this one for 666 that I opened up because when I'm running my code on the system, it's going to expose 666, but if I don't have a firewall rule, my own Windows Defender firewall will shield that port, and I won't get 666 to render over here. Okay, did everybody see that detail in the solution requirements? So here's my 123 and 456 rules, right? And some of them are open and some of them are pinhole. If I go down here and I look at remote desktop, I have remote desktop enabled. Okay. The $64,000 question is, do I have remote desktop enabled so that it only allows a specific host to connect? And is that the source for my 135/435 exposure? One thing that I want you to do is to consider establishing a pinhole. So if you look at the scope and you see that they're open, what I want you to do intentionally is to identify the IP address of the host that you're going to connect from. And I want you to list specific discretionary IP addresses, remote and local, so that the firewall rule only allows the remote desktop services to access the port from that IP address. And when I scan from my Kali machine, what I should get, I shouldn't see this listed unless there's something else that's running, right? So MSRPC, that's remote procedure call. So there's something else going on there, but I got to get to the bottom of that. If you find that that's also the case in your neighborhood, we need to work on that together. All right. Any comments, questions on what we're sharing at this point? Did everyone see that it's the newer version of Python that actually runs the script I shared? And did everybody get a copy of the script?
Yeah. I did.
Yeah.
Did
Yeah, I
anyone
did.
did anyone have a problem? Did anyone have a problem getting the script on the machine?
Getting it on the machine? No.
Okay. You know what else causes exposure through remote RPC? Something called SMB. Does anyone know what that is? SMB?
Heard of it before.
Say again?
I think I've heard of it before in your class.
Server message block. When you're sharing a folder, one of the ways that I moved the script, the Python code onto the server is that I shared the temp folder. And when I shared the temp folder, I actually listed explicit permissions. I removed the everyone, okay? Can everybody see what I'm talking about here? Hello? I just got a flash on my screen that said I had an unstable internet connection.
You're still here. We still
I'm
see.
still there?
You're still here. We can still hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did most of you get the code for Python on your server? Did you drag and drop it? Did you
I
use
just kind of, I went through the actual like server onto the actual assignment and downloaded it from there.
So you got it from Blackboard using the server?
Yeah, I got it from
Yeah.
Blackboard using the server.
Okay. I set up a share that I can access to drop things onto my server into the temp folder. And actually, when I look at my system here, so this is another source where you can have exposures. And if the server is sharing it, even if it's hidden, so even if it's a hidden share with a $sign, you still have some hooks into RPC for directory shares, whether they're, regardless of the permissions and settings that are on those. So one thing I can do is remove the share and then run Kali again and see if I'm still getting 135 and 445, right? And that's what we're going to be. So in the next module, this is where we're going to be doing the troubleshooting and investigation and deep dives. We're also going to start working with Wireshark and so on. I'm going to attempt to see if I can induce a change so I'm no longer exposed on 135 and 445. But I also wanted to show you that to be sure I'm dealing with the same machine, since I'm dealing with DHCP, does everyone have the capacity for DHCP reservations on your Wi-Fi router?
I believe so, yeah.
5F,
It's been giving
5B.
me issues, but after I did the latest install of the firmware, it's been giving me issues, but I'm gonna try to work with it.
Ah. I want to say that 5F5B13 is actually my laptop, and this is historical from yesterday. So let me go into here again. There it is. It's my Intel Wi-Fi adapter on my host machine, 5F5B13. So the exposure that I'm dealing with here, that I grabbed the screen from yesterday, isn't from my virtual machine. It's actually from my host laptop. And yes, I was sharing a folder at that time. So I had a directory share active at the time, and I could tear that down and run the scan again and see what happens. Did anyone have any problems running the script on the server?
For me, I did have a problem, though I fixed it by just repairing both versions of the Python.
Okay.
But yeah, like when I first downloaded it, the Python 3.12 seemed to work fine, but when I tried them to execute the code to run, like the Python code, like the command prompt just didn't recognize that Python existed.
Okay. And now it's working.
Yeah, now it's working.
So I'm gonna switch to the temp folder and trying to remember what the name of this thing is. It is pysoc build.py, bld.py. So I run Python, pysoc, bld.py. And there we go. If I'm on my Kali, I'm gonna go ahead on here and change the, it seems like I have to change the display every time I open my Kali. I don't know why it keeps reverting back to 800 by 600. Is anybody else having the same issue with your Kali? So today's date is the 25th, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So now what I'm doing is running this. I believe I had an active share in play between my host and my virtual server, so that could account for this. If I get a different result, it could be because that share isn't there. So it's listening on 666. But then there was a connection that was made from 31 on port. Is everybody seeing this?
It made a connection on port 1024.
Uh-huh. Says an existing connection was forcibly closed by the remote host. So something's going on here. And this is, what the hell is, I hope that my Kali machine is 31, right? I mean, I'm hoping that this is just a result from the Nmap traffic. Actually, that's a screenshot. So in here, let's just view this. Everybody see that? So now 666 shows. Do I see IRC? I see a printer. Jet Direct. That's kind of weird.
IRC is above.
There's IRC, there's Telnet. You know, I'm not seeing a MAC address this time. That's kind of weird. So Nmap, Nmap a day or so ago returned, it returned the MAC address and took a guess at what the manufacturer's origin is. I'm not seeing that now, so that's a difference. And one of the things that I want you to be aware of is that you're going to experience different results at different times, and you're going to have some variability there, and you got to be ready to capture it, right? You need to be able to find ways to capture the artifacts. And then what do I want you to do in each case you have an artifact? Can you guess? What
Capture
should,
it.
yes, you should hash it. You should run a hash against that artifact so that basically if you come back to it later, you can run the hash again and say, see, this was an unmodified artifact. It, you know, it's still in the pristine state when it was first captured. It hasn't been corrupted. So does anyone know why? And I'm just asking the question openly. Does anyone know why the same nmap command today would not render the MAC address? Would anyone care to hazard a guess?
Because it's older, it won't recognize the MAC address.
That's possible, but what is it that happens on a daily basis in your home environment when you're connecting to the internet? You get pop-ups about a certain thing that has to happen every so many days. What am I talking about?
Update.
Updates, right? Absolutely. So one of the sources of differences that can start to play out, one of your important aspects of network forensics is that you need to be able to duplicate or replicate, repeat with the same results. That's a large part of your credibility and viability, especially if you're a subject matter expert and you have to, you know, you're a subject matter expert and you have to testify. So I have some wrinkles here that I got to figure out. One is I'd like to understand what happened to the MAC address. The second is, why am I showing something about an HP printer when I don't have a damn HP printer in my network? That's Jet Direct. Okay, so that usually has to do with printers. Jet Direct is usually, and here's internet printing protocol, IPP, and here's printer, right? But hello, here's Telnet again. That's not a happy thing. And then as I keep looking, let's see what address I am on the Kali, right? Oh, look. 31 is the Kali address. Does this make sense now? Is this something that I would expect if I were running an Nmap scan from a Kali machine on .31 and I had a socket open on 666 and then that socket is discovered by Nmap? Is this an understandable result or outcome of that interaction? What would you guess? Do I have something to be worried about? What's going on here? So it was forcibly closed by the remote host. That means the Kali box closed this after it was finished doing the Nmap. Is this something I need to worry about, or is it understandable under the circumstances? I guess that's the question.
I think it's understandable.
It is understandable. I would agree. In particular, because I have definition and I know. Now, remember that yesterday, .28 was my host machine. And today, it could be something different. So you can do one of two things to get better definition as we go forward. You can implement DHCP reservations so that each of your experimental hosts, right, your virtual machines, pick up the same IP address each time. Or you can, as an alternative, suss out. You can, as a part of your protocol, your experimental protocol, you can identify the IP addresses and log those with each iteration. So with each cycle of investigation, you can validate, okay, here's my IP address for the virtual server. Here's my IP address for the Kali box. Here's the virtual address for here's my IP address for the host. And you make a record of this and you log the record of this, and anything you collect, you hash, right? So that we know that the evidence that you would refer to in the future is untainted or uncorrupted, all right? I think there's a lot of value for using DHCP reservations just to keep it simple, so you don't have to worry about that all the time. Okay. So on Friday, what we're going to ask you to do is to share the same kinds of things from your screens. That's what we're going to do on Friday. On Friday, I need you to be prepared to show and share the same kinds of detail from the solution. And I want us to investigate together what's going on. So you have to be capable of doing something live and interactive, just like I showed you here today. Any questions before we close?